For over 900 years, Imam Ghazali's diagnosis has remained hidden in ancient texts. Today, modern psychology is finally catching up to what he discovered. There are 7 invisible killers living in your heart. The scariest part, most people die spiritually before they even realize they're infected. I'm about to share something that will fundamentally change how you see yourself. Because what Imam Ghazali discovered about the human heart wasn't just spiritual theory. It was a precise medical diagnosis of the soul. And these 7 diseases, they're more common today than they've ever been. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali lived in the 11th century, but his understanding of human psychology was centuries ahead of his time. While the world focused on external sins, Ghazali looked deeper. He identified 7 spiritual diseases that operate in complete silence, destroying hearts from the inside out. What makes these sins so dangerous is their invisibility. You can commit them while praying, while helping others, even while doing good deeds. They're not about what you do. They're about the hidden motivations poisoning your actions. So let's diagnose your heart. As I go through each one, ask yourself honestly, do I recognize this in myself? The first deadly sin of the heart is arrogance. But this isn't the obvious kind where someone brags or shows off. Ghazali identified a much more subtle form, spiritual arrogance. This is when you feel superior because of your knowledge, your good deeds, or your spiritual practices. You might think, at least I'm not like those people who don't pray, or I understand things others don't. The terrifying thing about spiritual arrogance is that it grows strongest in those who are actually doing good. The more you learn, the more you practice, the more infected you become. You start seeing yourself as somehow closer to God than others. Ghazali said, "This disease is like a cancer that spreads through your good deeds, corrupting them from within. Your prayers become performances. Your charity becomes self-congratulation. Your wisdom becomes a weapon against others." The cure. Remember that everything good in you comes from God, not from you. Your intelligence, your ability to do good, even your desire to be spiritual, none of it originated from you. The second disease is envy, but not the kind you think. Ghazali wasn't talking about wanting someone else's car or house. He meant spiritual envy, resenting others for their blessings, their success, or their apparent closeness to God. This disease whispers things like, "Why does he have it so easy while I struggle?" Or, "She doesn't deserve that blessing." Or, "I work harder than them, but they get the recognition." What makes spiritual envy so toxic is that it makes you an enemy of God's mercy. When God blesses someone else and you resent it, you're essentially arguing with divine wisdom. You're saying, "God, you made a mistake." Modern psychology calls this comparison syndrome. But Ghazali understood its spiritual dimension. Envy doesn't just make you unhappy. It blocks blessings from reaching you. It creates a wall between your heart and divine grace. The antidote is to train your heart to celebrate others' blessings as if they were your own. When someone succeeds, let their joy become your joy. This transforms your heart from a competitor into a celebrant. The third disease is hatred, but again, not obvious hatred. Ghazali meant the subtle resentment that builds up in your heart toward people who have wronged you, disappointed you, or simply annoyed you. You might think you've forgiven them, but deep down there's a cold distance. You're polite on the surface, but your heart has closed its doors. You avoid them, speak about them differently, or secretly wish for their failure. This disease is particularly dangerous because it feels justified. Of course I don't like them. Look what they did to me. But Ghazali understood that hatred is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. What's worse, this disease spreads. One resentment leads to another. Soon your heart becomes a storehouse of grievances, each one making you more bitter, more closed, more spiritually dead. The healing comes through understanding that people's actions toward you are tests of your own spiritual state. Can you maintain love even when others don't deserve it? This is where your soul either grows or dies. The fourth disease is the love of status, the deep need to be important, respected, or recognized. This isn't about wanting a promotion. It's about your heart's addiction to being seen as significant. You might notice this when criticism hurts more than it should, when being ignored bothers you, or when you need constant validation for your worth. Your mood depends on how others perceive you. Your actions are motivated by gaining approval rather than doing what's right. Ghazali saw this as spiritual slavery. When your heart needs human approval to function, you've made people your god. You've given them power over your inner peace, your self-worth, your very identity. This disease is epidemic in our social media age. We've created platforms specifically designed to feed our need for status, likes, shares, follows, comments. But Ghazali predicted this centuries ago. He knew that the human heart would always find ways to worship itself through others' approval. Freedom comes when you realize that the only approval that matters is God's. When you can act with integrity, whether anyone notices or not, your heart begins to heal. The fifth disease is love of wealth. But this goes far beyond greed. Ghazali meant any attachment that makes material things more important than spiritual growth. This disease makes you anxious about money, possessive about your belongings, or constantly worried about having enough. You might be generous with small amounts, but panic at the thought of real sacrifice. Your security comes from what you own, not from trusting in divine provision. The subtle form of this disease is when you convince yourself that you need wealth to do good. I just want to make more money so I can help people, or I need this success to support my family. These thoughts aren't necessarily wrong, but they become spiritual poison when they're driven by attachment rather than trust. Ghazali understood that wealth itself isn't evil. Attachment to it is. When your heart depends on material security, you've created an idol that demands constant worship through worry, work, and accumulation. The medicine is remembering that you came into this world with nothing and you'll leave with nothing. Everything in between is temporary. True security comes from knowing that God provides, not from what you've accumulated. The sixth disease is what Ghazali called gluttony of the soul. The endless hunger for experiences, pleasures, and stimulations. This isn't just about food. It's about any excessive desire that consumes your attention. In our time, this might manifest as endless scrolling, binge-watching, shopping therapy, or the constant need for entertainment. Your soul becomes like a hungry ghost, always consuming but never satisfied. This disease is particularly dangerous because it disguises itself as enjoying life. I'm just having fun, or I deserve this pleasure becomes the justification for spiritual emptiness. But Ghazali knew that excessive pleasure-seeking actually creates more emptiness, not less. When your heart is always seeking the next experience, the next purchase, the next entertainment, it loses its ability to find satisfaction in simple presence. You become spiritually obese, overfed but undernourished. The cure is practicing contentment with less. When you can find joy in simplicity, when a moment of silence feels more satisfying than endless stimulation, your soul begins to remember its true nature. The seventh and perhaps most dangerous disease is despair. The belief that you're beyond help, beyond change, beyond God's mercy. This isn't just depression, it's spiritual hopelessness. You might think, I've made too many mistakes. I'm not good enough for spiritual growth, or God could never forgive someone like me. Despair is the ultimate sin against hope. It makes you give up on yourself before God gives up on you. And Ghazali taught that God never gives up on anyone. This disease convinces you that your spiritual death is inevitable. So why try? What makes despair so deadly is that it becomes self-fulfilling. If you believe you can't change, you won't make the effort to change. If you believe you're hopeless, you'll act hopeless. If you believe God has abandoned you, you'll abandon yourself. But here's what Ghazali knows. Despair is actually a form of arrogance. It's saying your sins are bigger than God's mercy. Your mistakes more powerful than divine forgiveness. It's making yourself the measure of what's possible rather than trusting in infinite compassion. Now let's be honest. As you listen to these 7 diseases, how many did you recognize in yourself? If you're like most people, you probably saw yourself in at least 3 or 4 of them. This isn't meant to discourage you. It's meant to wake you up. Because Ghazali's genius wasn't just in diagnosing these diseases. It was in providing the cure. The treatment for all 7 diseases is the same. Remembering who you really are in relationship to God. You are not your arrogance, your envy, your hatred, your need for status, your attachments, your cravings, or your despair. You are a soul temporarily wearing a human costume, here to learn how to love without condition, how to trust without guarantee, how to give without receiving, and how to find peace without possessing. Every disease of the heart comes from forgetting this truth. Every healing comes from remembering it. Imam Ghazali spent years studying these diseases, not as an academic exercise, but as a prescription for human flourishing. He understood that the heart is like soil. It will grow whatever you plant in it. If you plant arrogance, envy, hatred, status-seeking, attachment, craving, and despair, your heart will become a wasteland. But if you plant humility, gratitude, love, service, trust, contentment, and hope, your heart becomes a garden where the divine can dwell. The choice is yours, and it's made not once but every moment of every day. Which seeds are you planting in your heart right now? If this resonated with you, you're ready for deeper work. Subscribe for more insights into the hidden teachings that can transform your inner life. And remember, recognizing the disease is already the beginning of the cure.